All right, what's up, guys? We are back for episode 14. Atif is brave enough again to let me steer the ship by myself, so we're going to see how interview two goes. Today we have the opportunity and chance to talk to my good friend Sanat. Sanat, how you doing today, man? Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Doug. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I know it's been all of like 72 hours, but in crypto that feels like a lifetime. But yeah, man. Like I said, appreciate you coming on, man. I guess like a good icebreaker, man. If you kind of want to take 5 to 7 minutes, man, you want to give a little TLDR about yourself for the people at home, kind of just any background, education, work, upbringing stuff you want to talk about, any interests or avenues that got you into crypto, and then kind of we can just jump from there, man.
Yeah, sounds good. So, as Doug said, uh, I I got into crypto a few years ago. I'm mostly a blockchain enthusiast. When I got into it because I read the Bitcoin white paper in 2018. And I was very enthralled by the possibility of having a decentralized currency and the possibility of smart contracts at the time. So it wasn't like Bitcoin didn't particularly talk about smart contracts at the time, but the idea of having like a smart contract, which Ethereum came out, like Ethereum really popularized afterwards, was very interesting to me. So as part of this, I went to the University of Texas at Austin. Nothing related to crypto. Uh, I went there, studied computer science. I have a graduate degree in artificial intelligence. I work currently in AI as an engineer and a researcher. So I do like a lot of production stuff for artificial intelligence. I write research papers at times as well. I've been published, patents, all those things. Um, but my interest in crypto mostly stemmed from that. And then I've been a fascinating watcher and reader of the industry. So I read some of the papers that come out. I go to some of the talks that we have in Austin for Bitcoin, for general crypto. Unlike some of the people that we talked to, I'm not particularly a maxi. I'm not even particularly a very avid trader. I'm more of like a long term, the fundamentals of the blockchain type of person. And so a little bit more about me. I grew up in New Delhi and I lived around different places, but I came to Austin in 2015 for undergrad and then grad school. And then I've been here since then. And I met you in I think 2020, 2021, like right after like the height of the pandemic,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, it's been about 2 years. I'm trying. It doesn't seem like it, but yeah, I think it's about 2 years or something crazy like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a bit of me.
No, that was a good intro, man. Yeah, one thing I've always joked about with like Atif and the group, man, is well, in the last episode we were talking about just kind of uh in these crazy times, like as you're building the plane while you're flying it, it helps to have like for example, the Mark Cubans of the world, they say if you get assistants or helpers, let's say you're really good with people skills, you might want someone that's analytical or they can just spend 8 hours behind a computer. And I told Atif that's one thing I like about our group is we got a good plethora of people. And same thing, like you're on the real technical side with the Jacob Isaacs, the Robs of our group. And that was one thing when I first met you. I remember we were talking about stuff, and I want to say you had some shit coins, but I remember you got like in Solana and other stuff that was, experimental in the bull market. But same thing, I remember you were kind of like, yeah, it might be not just like a head over water, but you're like, I don't know if I'm cool with this risk. And you kind of moved into cash, or you moved it whatever you wanted to, and you kind of like, for lack of a better word, you licked your wounds and you moved on. Where like we said, in the peak of the bull market, we had these NFT guys coming up, and
Hmm.
we chat with them. They're like, "Oh yeah, I just bought this monkey tooth for like fucking 10 Ethereum," and I'm like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "What's your game plan here, buddy?" He's like, "Oh, when it doubles," and this is like November of 2021. We're like,
Hmm.
"Bro, this has like it like 2 months left at most, and this blows up." So that was one thing when I remember I met you and we were talking. You're like, "Oh yeah, like some of this stuff's cool, but." That's one thing I liked. You weren't one of these because we had some technical guys in the group, but they're like, "Oh, I'm smart. I work in AI. I know how to day trade." I'm like, I don't know if you want to play that game. It's statistically not in your favor.
Yeah, I think humans in general have a lot of inertia. But what I say about that is when things are going well, we think that things will continue to go well.
Hmm.
And when things are going poorly, we continue to think that things are going to go poorly.
Yep.
So, as people also call it, the analysis paralysis. A lot of people struggle with that. Some people just struggle with inertia in general and the lack of like not foreseeing change. So I think even in bull markets, it's very easy to get FOMO and be tempted to get into avenues which I don't know, might not be the best, but at the time they seemed good because hindsight is always 2020, right? So I also got into like some of like some altcoins, uh mostly because of FOMO at the time. But I was always pretty certain to only put like a very small percentage of my total allocation pool to those altcoins. Uh, and also like I mean considering like crypto as a tradable asset is more of a high volatility asset. For general people who want to trade, it's probably best not to put all of your allocation in general in crypto, because of the high volatility. So it's always good to have like some balance in portfolio. If you're more risk on, you can do more of like the risk, like the high volatility assets, but have some backup plan in case things get a shit as we've seen in this market. So yeah, I do agree with that thesis that we saw a lot of people uh who were buying NFTs for very expensive amounts actually. Like we had someone come in who bought an NFT for 1 Bitcoin at the time. One whole Bitcoin.
I don't
And
remember that. Wow. Yeah.
yeah, they basically converted 1 Bitcoin into Ethereum and they spent that Ethereum to buy like these NFTs at the meantime and they didn't sell out. So the NFTs, if they don't sell out, they basically lose all their value. Uh, and so they just like chill away. And this was before the true bull market. So Bitcoin at the time was probably like around 43 or maybe 35K, but still, that's a lot of money to just lose away and
Oh,
gamble.
hell yeah.
Uh, on anything. So yeah, I think people will learn some lessons, but I'm not sure they'll truly learn that many lessons. As we're seeing with the economy right now, with like a lot of banks, we were talking before the pod started about Deutsche Bank being down, Credit Suisse, which was at one point the darling of the banking industry in Europe, is like just got bought over by UBS. It was down like 90% of its last decade. Kind
Something
of
like that.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a good segue. You definitely said, analysis by paralysis, and people, like we said 36 months ago, everyone was like, things are, fine and dandy. The Fed's in control. They're, Captain America. They can't do no wrong. And now people are kind of starting to see, the tide's going out. Who's skinny dipping? The emperor might not have any clothes. And same thing, like I said, we got a good spread, for lack of a better word, and people in our group. You kind of have people like Rob. I love Rob and Chris. They're like perma bears. Everything's fucked 24/7. And then you got like Isaac, where it's like, oh, we're peak inflation. It's nothing but up, and Lambos and hookers from here. And then I'd say like you and me, kind of not if like fall in the middle. I would say maybe I'm a little bit more bearish than you. I'm still in that 10K Bitcoin drum, and obviously we're more risk on. But if we go, let's call that a 60% haircut from here, obviously what happens in housing and everything else. But sometimes it's in the last couple months I've talked to you. Sometimes I feel like you're kind of on that optimistic side, like Isaac. Sometimes you're not as bearish as Rob, but just depending on whatever data is coming out. But like we said, people kind of, whatever the trend is, they keep going that direction. A month ago everyone was pretty optimistic, like not in crypto in our group, just macro. And it seems like the last month, just with the more banks blowing up, and they're slowing down the rate hikes, but Jerome Powell and the Fed they're keeping the train moving. So I guess like currently, and maybe like the next 90 to 120 calendar days, like how are you feeling macroly about stuff? Are you negative, still sideways, optimistic, or it's kind of just too hard to tell? How are you feeling about everything?
So yeah, that's a good question. So as you mentioned, I'm more of a optimist by nature. Although I'm also in terms of trading, I'm very much a pragmatist. Like I look at the market, I keep up with the news. I'm optimistic like on humanity and like things working out and things like that. But like I've learned that it's very important to keep your emotions away while trading, or doing like any trades in general. Uh, in terms of the economy, I don't think personally that we're gonna go into like a full blown banking crisis as some people expect. And by full blown, I mean like the big banks, like a significant chunk of smaller banks dying or failing, and like a huge amount of quantitative easing required or bailout required to like take them, like make them stable. I do think we might hit some minor, like a few more banks crumbling. Uh, and it's very hard to predict who, right? I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, I know what's going to happen because I don't think anyone in the industry even really predicted some of the banks scaling this quickly. Uh, but I do think like the next 3 months to 6 months, we're going to be in a very weird territory where the equities market might go up still because of like how companies are still being able to like cut costs right now and produce a significant amount of profit still. However, the actual economy, the consumers are going to still continue to hurt.
Mm.
So as the Fed has said that the rates are probably not going to dip this year, and they're probably going to reach 3% next year is what they said. Like it's possible by the end of 2024, we're at 3%, 3% rates. That basically means that several sectors of our society, including startups, including like sectors which are inherently more risk on, have to basically weather a longer, tighter credit schedule for a longer period of time, which eventually will cause cracks in society. The biggest one that I am very bearish on is the housing industry right now. Not in terms of just the real estate industry, not only housing, but also uh, commercial housing. So commercial housing, a lot of the mortgages are expiring this year. So there's like a couple articles I was reading yesterday about like expiring commercial real estate mortgages are expiring this year. And 70% of all uh, of the large chunk of expiring mortgages are held by smaller banks, because smaller banks and community banks are basically the lifelines of small communities and communities in general. People go to them for borrowing. People go to like credit unions for borrowing. Credit unions are much better state because they're not for profit, so they put most of their money in non-risky assets in general. So they're usually okay. But these small banks are for profit. They put a lot of money in these treasury bills. They put a lot of money in like different assets which are risk on. And with all these mortgages expiring, if even a small chunk of them default, because a lot of commercial real estate is empty these days, and a lot of companies are pulling back from like full-time offices and stuff like that. If even like a small chunk of them start defaulting on their payments, things like that, we might see another bubble or another issue in terms of like these banks needing help. Uh, in terms of housing, like non-commercial, general public housing, there's a big issue because if rates are so high, um, like a large percent of people, and forget what percent, but like a very large percent of people have mortgage rates below 4%, right? So why would they buy or trade their house and take a different mortgage, which is like at 7%? Which means that the housing industry, which is like one of the key indicators of the health of the economy, stagnates. It has always stagnated. Without, at least in Austin, without like 30% sales year over year, for the month of January, because last year it was like the peak of the high, right? In the Austin bubble. Yeah. So if this continues, a significant chunk of industry, everything related to housing will slow down. And if that slows down, like the housing prices will go down. And so a lot of people who bought in 2021 are going to be underwater for that as well. So we might see, especially people who took variable loans, So like the fixed mortgage is like the most popular loan category in the US, but people also take variable loans, which basically means like their interest payments depend based on the interest rates being provided at the moment. We might see some of those defaulting if the economy slows down and the unemployment rate rises because of like the other factors you were saying. Yeah, I am not very bullish for the near future. What about you?
Yeah, it's one of those. I mean, I know. Correct me again. How long you been in Austin? Like 5, 7 years.
About 80 years, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I remember just like the last year or so, like we're talking about everything, and I know you moved a little bit, and we were talking about that. I was like, because you got a good job, you make good money, and I was like, oh, you think about pulling Isaac, saving some money, getting a house, and you're like, why the hell do I want a house? I got a yard and stupid shit. I'm like, well, where do you want to move? And you want to move downtown, like get like a studio condo, just because like you said, like back in India, that's kind of more of a cultural thing, like the whole America white picket bullshit fence with your dog frisbee. That's something that didn't entertain you. But I remember we were talking, you were kind of like, oh, I wish I kind of did it a couple years before, because you were telling me you remember when the average, quality, let's call it like a 4.2 or 3.3 in Austin was like, 300, 350. And like we've both seen, and a lot of people probably listening, it's like I got a friend of a friend up in Round Rock. She's divorced right now, but she has like a modest 4.3 up in Round Rock. But basically, she told me, she had an appraiser said that if she, put some elbow grease into it, she could get almost like 850, 900 for it. Don't get me wrong, it's a gorgeous house, but it's just a house. And I think you, Carl and I were joking about this one time, like growing up, at least in America, like when I was like 13, 12 and shit, I thought of $1 million in my head. That's like a mansion out in Lakeway. We're like in Austin, like you were
Mhm.
saying, in the last couple of years, that's just an average house. Don't get me wrong, it's better than, the apartment I'm in right now. It's just an average house. And I mean, I think that whole summary did was like great. I think it just shows, like we talk about this a lot. I think the problem with the economy right now, like you said, whether it's commercial or just personal housing, people use that equity, they use that as loans to get other assets, or they just get liquidity so they can move it somewhere else, etc. But the problem is people assume that the price they're getting on that for that loan and the value are the same
Mhm.
thing. And I mean, I assume this has definitely hit your sector a lot. One thing, Lewis Rossman, I know we talk about him in the group. For people at home that aren't aware of him, he's a MacBook repairman who was in New York City, grew up there his whole life. He's actually now in Austin, but he basically started a shop from scratch over the last 10 plus years, got like 50 employees. But also, one thing that his channel is big for is he'll do these AMA rants, etc. And especially over COVID, he went around in New York and showed that there are basically these empty buildings that have been empty for years. It's even worse after COVID, because something New York City real estate is like 1 trillion, $1.5 trillion in total value. A lot of banks use that for investors. Again, thing is loans, get liquidity, etc. Well, basically, if they
Mhm.
drop it to actual market value, not even the price, uh, obviously the loan's worth than what it is defaulted. So it's like, what's the basic math on that, etc. But he basically showed that like in New York, which used to be the financial hub of the world, they're more incentivized now to keep these buildings empty, just because they put out loans on them. So then if they mark them down, the actual value, uh, you know, you know, two minus four is not a good number at the end of the day, And I assume this has hit your
Yeah.
sector. I've talked with people in town. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, 5 years ago, it was pretty normal in tech for, you have 3, 5 days in the office. And I don't know if that was the same for you, but I know when COVID hit, the tech sector was one of the first ones that's like, why are we paying for all this commercial real estate? Sanat and Isaac and these guys can just work not even as good. They're probably more efficient working from home, working mobile, because they're not spending 2 hours a day in traffic. And to your point, that was the Lynn Aldens and like the not as much Peter Schiff, but like Lawrence Lepper. I follow them a lot. When COVID hit, they said one of the biggest things, like even though housing was going up crazy at the time, they weren't even concerned with that. Like to your point, a lot of the commercial real estate people working from home and businesses are like, oh shit, not only are we just as productive, we're more productive because our coders like Sanat, they're not spending 2 hours a day in traffic. Why the hell are we spending $200 a square foot for a place in, Palo Alto or New
Mhm.
York City or whatever? So yeah, to your point, that's something I'm keeping tabs on, because people are worried about the housing bubble, which you can argue there's one similar. I don't know if that is as toxic and as widespread as 2008, but to your point, that's one thing I've been keeping tabs on. I
I
think
think
the
so.
commercial bubble right now is probably, besides like personal debt and student loans, is probably like one of the top 5 bubbles in America that's just waiting to pop right now.
Yeah, the other two that you mentioned are also a bit worrisome, specifically the savings rate of people right now. With inflation rising, people are saving less and less. I think the savings rate is like at a low in the past 20 years, something crazy. Since the great the financial crisis, it's like the lowest savings rate. Uh, and also credit card debt is at the highest ever.
Mm-hmm.
So those are not good combinations. If you have low savings and high credit card debt, and a longer term inflation rate, like the inflation is going to be higher for longer, it's not a good place to be. That specifically also is the reason why like the housing market is even more bearish, because like, if a lot of these people have high debt, low savings, how are you going to put the down payment to buy these houses, right?
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
for the American dream is like buy a house in the late 20s, early 30s, have like in a suburb or somewhere else. That's not my dream. I don't like suburbs personally, but that's the general dream for a lot of people. They want to have a yard, they want to do those things. It's very hard now to afford it. And so like a lot of millennials are especially facing that issue. Who are like older than us, maybe like in their early 30s, mid 30s, who are having a very hard time buying a house. Yeah. It's not it's not, that's why like, it's hard to be bullish right now when a significant chunk of the economy is suffering. And so the Fed, I think, is in a very rock in a hard place right now. Because if inflation does not go down, it will really hurt the economy and people in general who are already hurting with like prices and stuff like that. Uh, we typically see that countries with like sustained high inflation don't do well, because it's very hard to know how much to save. It's very hard to like, you have to like continuously adjust your wages basically, which doesn't happen to be able to like afford the same quality of life. Uh, but if they like, don't go, like if they say like, okay, screw inflation, we got to save the banks, then they have an issue. But if they keep raising the interest rates, then say we only got to care about the inflation, we might lose like significant chunks of the society might just fall as it is, right? Uh, so yeah, I think they're in a very hard place. In terms of tech, tech was one of the first uh, like industries to actually really welcome remote work, and I think that's really useful. However, I think the trends we see are still up in the air. What's going to happen? The general trend in tech has still been remote work, but only this week, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen like Apple is now saying to take like action against people who don't come into the office 3 days a week. Amazon uh, was like remote for like 2+ years, and now they're saying we can't come back to the office. Google's back in the office. So we're seeing Meta's back in the office. We're seeing these like reverse trends as well. And I think that's mostly just employers think it's like seeing that they have a big upper hand. So they're like, we got to get people back in. We got to like, like put in our dominance, whatever they want to do with that. Which is, I don't understand it, because we've seen like people are more productive at home in tech, at least. So like those trends, I think will change. But to your earlier question, in terms of like commercial real estate and tech and other companies, I think the general trend is that more and more companies, as per the cost cutting measures, are moving away from long-term commercial leases, and they're going more towards like home-based, work from home stuff, because it's so much cheaper. So a lot of these big companies are doing back to work because they have very long-term leases. They built these big campuses before the pandemic or even during the pandemic. But for a lot of smaller companies, it makes so much more sense to not have a expensive lease, to grow your company remote, fully remote. And then if you really want to have an office, have one office, but don't really like go all in into like getting your workforce in the office, because having like a remote workforce is so useful for you to be able to scale and grow. and be able to hire people regardless of like their geographical location. Yeah. So I don't think we're going back fully to the world of everyone's in the office. So yeah, it's very time for commercial real estate leases right now, I think.
I got a two-part question for you there. Uh, I feel like you might have kind of answered the first one. Like, do you think, like you said, the Googles, Facebooks of the world, of the Silicon Valleys, do you think they want, like you said, they invested hundreds of millions, if not billions? And I could be wrong. I think the new Google building downtown next to the Colorado was like almost a billion or more to build. But to your point, they put up all this capital. They're like, it's like if you get a reservation at a restaurant, even if your date doesn't show up, it's like I'm going to Ruth Chris. I just, I paid for my reservation. I'm getting my money's worth. Do you think they're just trying to get their money's
Yeah.
worth? Or I've said it a couple times, and for people at home not listening, like I do concert work. My job is very hands on site. I wish I could do it behind a Zoom camera. I can't. Blah blah blah. Where your job, one of the
Mhm.
benefits is at the end of the day, whether it's the front end, whatever stack, back end, if it works, it works. So one of the benefits is you can work remote. But I guess do you feel like they want people back in the office just because they're obviously trying to get the most out of the building they paid for? Or do you feel I guess for you, like, do you feel like how do I word this? Like one day a week, maybe you need to see. I know some of your coworkers you said are on the West Coast you work with, but like, do you feel like one day a week you need to see people in person? Do you feel like you can completely be remote, and if you never saw your coworkers in person, you can be? Because like the reason I ask is, like obviously there's Twitter of the world. There's the Nordstrom is or Nostr, sorry, is picking up some tread. But I tell people if you go on crypto Twitter, you're like, all these people are Alex Jones, like socialists, crazy batshit people. Like, why would I ever get in this? And then if people come to our meetups, it's like, oh, these are just average normal people. We have a couple quacks that come here and there, but these are just people that are everything from humanitarian to they're doing the breaking edge of technology and everything in between. And that's the reason I bring that up. It's like, there's a lot of stuff you can do digital, and social media and technology is great, but there is something to that little 10% of like human interaction, whatever you want to call it. It's really hard to replicate that. So like I guess, like, what's your whole take on that? You think they're, like I said, they're just trying to cover their ass. And I do agree with you. I think the 5-day work week, always going into the office, might be a thing of the past. But like into the future, do you think it's like 3 days, minimum one day? Like people still need to be in person, or like the market's just going to figure that out like everything else?
Yeah, that's it. It's something that a lot of people are debating right now, at least in the future work space. Um, my take is that yes, human interaction is very useful for creating bonds and for creating like anything social. I think human interaction and in person is vastly superior than everything that's like online. Like online social communities are very fickle. You're not very connected to them often. Not always, but often. Uh, I don't fully know the solution for companies because there's two things. One is even if you do like 2 days in office and 3 days remote, that still means that you're only hiring people in that area, right? So you're not truly like a global hiring, like a globally scalable company, right? You can then have offices in different places, but those are also like located in that area. You're asking people to move for that, which kind of defeats the purpose, some of the purpose of working from home. I think that most people that certain things like whiteboarding, and group discussions, it does help to be in person and interact. And also in person really helps like get better bonds with their coworkers. However, a lot of people don't really care about the social aspects that come with work, right? They mostly care about their group of friends outside of work, and they mostly just care about like the work aspects of work. Does the work from home for a lot of jobs, not all, but for a lot of jobs, make people more productive? We have seen this on the pandemic. So it's really a trade-off. Is do you want a tighter knit and like group of people? Does that really even matter? I don't know. For the most part, I think like for companies which are smaller and startups, having a remote first focus is extremely not only important, but necessary right now. because that'll help you get talent which otherwise might not come to your company because you're offering these benefits. And people like to work, especially people in my field who don't like talking to people anyway, like really like the
Well, hold up. AI people are
idea.
extroverted. Hold up. What?
Yeah. You might not, it might not seem like that from Twitter where all you see like people like, hey, 10 more tools to do this, or man, I miss the old AI Twitter. It's like such a, it's like very, like the current AI Twitter is almost like the Web3 Twitter. It's like so much hype cycles that, uh, yeah, that's just a small bit. But I do think, yeah, for a lot of industries, it doesn't make sense to me, especially if you're growing a business, to have an in-person like thing, mostly because of the benefits of being able to attract talent through work from home and the benefits of being able to hire across the geographical scale. Yeah. But for big companies, I do think it's going to be 2 and 3, 3 days in person, 2 days work, at least for a while, till the cycle reverses, till the employees then again get like a better, like have the upper hand in the market. Then you start seeing like the cycle reverse again. I think it's a very tug and pull war right now for the future of work.
No, that was a really good, like, not rant, but just like synopsis of that. And I guess like on that thread too, obviously you work in this space, so you'll be biased with this, but part of the reason I wanted you on, just Atif and I have given up of our bullshit rants and we got a Jacob on, which was a nice 8 ball. Recently in the last, let's just call it 3 to 6 months, everyone from, Amazon, to FedEx, to Facebook, Twitter, you name it, they just been trimming fat for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
I kind of want your take on that. Do you think, well, obviously in the last 12 years, 15 years, with all these super low interest rates, the Silicon Valley blue chips, they have just the NASDAQ companies just have led the economy, at least in America, right? Part of that is they have innovated. Part of that is if you get free money, it's kind of easy to make a profit for, obvious explanation. And then when everything kind of turned belly up after COVID, they were some of the first companies to trim fat. And some people make the argument that this shows they were over bloated. They just had people making 150K a year, sitting on their ass doing nothing. And then I've talked to people like Kat. She knows people that are diehard coders like you, and it's just the company picked names out of a bucket. Unfortunately, it was Bobby and Tiffany, etc. So, what's your take on that? Do you think in the tech industry right now, the layoffs are because the Twitters of the world are like, oh man, we have too much bloat, too much fat to trim, or do you think it's that they're like the Amazons, et cetera? They're like, whenever we come out of this, whatever this next bull market's going to look like, if it's 6 months from now, if it's 6 years from now, we got to make sure we put ourselves in a position with capital, resources, et cetera. The second we get that green light, we can just launch and go. So, what's your take? Do you think it in the tech sector right now too? COVID showed that there was excess bloat. And or do you think it's that these companies right now they're just all constantly in competition with each other, and obviously that's why out of all the layoffs right now, it's very tech condensed. Kind of, what's your take on that?
I think human psychology has a lot to do with how people do layoffs. When everyone's hiring, like in tech and in companies in general. So I'll answer this in 3 parts. The first one is the human psychology part. The second part that I'll talk about is the growth of tech in the last 10 years and how low interest rates have really led to like the current state that we have. And 3 could be the future of where I see the momentum changing, or like how I see like companies adapting for the future, right? Or the next full market. The first one is human psychology. So some of the companies like Google, even Amazon, don't need to do any layoffs. Like they have enough money. But the way human psychology works is during the time when there was like a worker shortage, everyone wants to do empire building, which is like if you're a director, if you're a VP, you want to get more people so you can like gain status. And it's very easy to justify hiring more people by adding new projects and saying that, hey, other companies are hiring and we don't want to get behind the innovation curve, right? Because innovation is everything in tech. If you stop innovating, you will eventually die off. Which we're seeing right now with the AI innovation stuff, which like no one fucking uses Bing, but now people are using it because it's more innovative and they like had this hype cycle. We're going back to the psychology part. If you see like the tech layoffs, so this year there's been about 200,000, 250,000 tech layoffs already. And they expect that number to reach about 1 million by the end of the year.
Oh, wow.
Or yeah, some people expect it. Well, some analysts expect it. I don't know if that's true. I don't have any predictions, but a lot of it's psychological as well because other companies are trimming fat. Investors, especially activist investors, are asking companies to trim fat. What companies are also seeing is when you do trim fat, you do get like a bump in the stock price. And also more companies are now offering stock buybacks, which also they see like you get a bump in the stock price. So a lot of companies are doing it for psychological reasons. Some are doing it for actually trimming fat, which is that they had so many projects going on that they basically are trying to like now have efficiency inside the project. So like just keep the projects that make the most sense, remove projects that don't have much value to the company. So low hanging projects, projects that have been ongoing and like lit up during the bull market, don't have any much takers, start like paring some of those down. So I do think it's a bit of both, but a lot of it's psychological. If you do see a lot of layoffs are actually being led by like big tech, and not particularly smaller companies or non-tech companies, which also have tech people in them. And that's part of the reason is also because they hired a lot of people. Like Google basically doubled its workforce during the pandemic, like the last 3 years. And it's very hard to double a workforce when you have like 100,000 people already, right? They're like, yeah, one second.
No, you're good.
Yeah, my Google Home was going crazy.
You're good.
But basically, it's very hard
Yeah.
to, yeah, it's very hard to double your workforce from like 130K to 220,000 people in like 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, of course they hired like extra people, but it's also a lot of it's psychology in the sense that, like, yeah, now they're all trying to cut costs. The second one is how did tech rise in the land of no interest rates? So when you said it's easier to make profits when money is cheap, that's not even the case of tech. In tech, the only thing that mattered to companies was grow at any price possible. So for startups, look at Uber, look at Lyft, look at a lot of these companies that came during the last 10 years. They still are not, a lot of them are still not profitable, or they're just starting to get profitable, or they have to like spend a lot of costs, like do a lot of changes and get profitable eventually. But the idea for VC money was that money is cheap and you basically grow, you acquire users any way possible, and you grow your user base. And then eventually, with enough growth, and enough market utilization, you can, once you're hooked, once the users are hooked onto the product, you can raise prices or the law of like large numbers, you can eventually get a profit. If your unit metrics are decent, you can eventually turn a profit. So it was like advertise as much, hire as much great talent, and just grow. And there's some merits to that in the sense that if you don't have the best talent, it's very hard to make some of the best products. So you need to have good people to be able to like build like innovative stuff, something that hasn't been done before. But I do think that like that lane of like free money and profit later, just grow first is gone now because it made a lot of people very wealthy. Like VC industry really boomed in the last 10 years, basically. And in the land, like the biggest bull market we've ever seen, right? And basically all of tech really, 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 benefited from the mass adoption of technology, which I do think will continue to could in the future. I don't think we're going back to like reducing technology usage anytime soon in our life. And I think one more companies are moving very head first towards like tech and everything. So I do think that is like a background of why tech grew the way it did and why it hired so many people and had these bidding wars. But I don't think it's going to last. So the third point I wanted to make was like the future of tech. I do think that now with like this current bull market, or not the bull, the current bear market, and the high interest rates. So the next couple of years, you're going to see like credit being very tight, in the sense that VC funding for most things is going to be down, which in turn stifles innovation because effectively, like, why are you going to leave your job or start new things if you don't like, if you can't support yourselves, right? So VC money, even though they're a lot of people call it evil people and they congratulate themselves way too much, are still an important part of the ecosystem in order to really grow the ecosystem. So I do think that's going to slow down. I think tech is going to slow down in general in the next couple of years, but I do think the usage of technology is going to be an all-time high among everyone. So the usage is going to continue to rise. Um, but a lot of the big players, I think their stock prices are going to continue to be high because the usage is really high. But I do think the growth in new tech is going to slow down. I think a lot of AI startups that are starting now are going to die off very quickly.
No, yeah, everything you said, I 100% agree with, and I know we've gone on those rabbit holes of the crypto meetup, and this past week, obviously, Atif was going down his little bit of a lover boy rant with Balaji and the whole $1 million bet, and we went down that rabbit hole. I've said it
Yeah,
so many
what's your
times.
thought? What's your take on biology and that bad?
We had the episode we just released yesterday, but just for everyone listening, a little TLDR. Uh, Balaji's a smart dude. I follow him on Twitter. I don't keep super close tabs with him, but I put him up there with like Charles and Udi and the Winkle-Eye twins. Guys have seen like good, bad, and ugly of crypto. They're smart dudes. They're real macro, etc. I basically told Atif that I think it's more he's doing a psychology experiment. Like for example, Plan B stock to flow, right? We were supposed to basically kiss about 250K at the end of 2021. We hit 60K twice
Mhm.
and didn't do it. And a lot of people, especially in our group, Jacob, have been vocal that, oh, Plan B is a fraud. And not necessarily that he was wrong, but after he was proven wrong, he was defending the model and stuff. And I told people there were two things. Uh, not that it justifies the model, but we basically hit 65K twice. You add that together, we're basically between 120, 150. So his model would have been partially right. And the reason I bring that up is, uh, A, crypto and Bitcoin has never gone through a macro recession, and B, we just did the world's largest social economic money printer experiment ever. Like to everyone listening, I've said this before, 50% of all the US dollars, 50% have been made in the last 36 months. So the thing is, even
Mhm.
Bitcoin, even though it is this thing that trades 24/7, it is really rigid because you have the 10-minute blocks, you have the nodes and the miners, how they interact. We have the 4-year halving cycle. So it is kind of stiff and rigid. And when you throw just this, for lack of a better word, black swan event in it, any models or guide rail projections you have can kind of go AWOL. And the reason I bring that up is, if, okay, like I said, Plan B said we're supposed to go to 250. If we went to $500,000, who would have been complaining? Nobody, right? Like they'd have been like, oh, this is great. And most of the time we overshoot the model because, like you said, FOMO, hysteria, just, humans, we're greedy creatures end of the day, And that's my point with biology. Uh, Anyone can be wrong. Titanic's unsinkable until it's not. But it wouldn't surprise me if he's almost doing like this psychology experiment. Just say
Mhm.
in 90 days we hit 100K. Everyone's going to be like, oh, you dumbass, you're wrong. We only hit 100K. He's going to be like, hey, dumbasses, in 90 calendar days, let's just call it a 4-3 bagger. And then people are going to be like, oh, so, and another thing too, I told Opta, if like, God forbid, even at the end of this year, let alone in 90 calendar days, if we hit $1 million, like, and, hyperinflation, which is like 50% month over month, like we're like on that thin line of Mad Max, and I don't want to play that game. Like if we go to $1 million, what happens to the US dollar? What happens? Like Turkey already has 100% year of inflation. Like what happens to them? South American countries. So I think Twitter the last week was like, very short term sighted. Yay, $1 million, biology is God. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, guys, like let's do some math on this. Like if we really hit $1 million, like macroly, what is the world looking like? I don't really want to play that game. 10 years from now, we're at $1 million. It's a slow and consistent. I'm cool with it. But Biology's not a dumb dude, and you've been in the space just as long as me. Crypto plebs by no means are intellectuals for the most part, most of us. So I think he was just, Twitter's for engagement and likes. You don't go on Twitter to have philosophical discussions. So I think, for lack of a better word, he was just dicking around with people. Um, again, if he's right, I might go back to church. Like, but if he's also wrong, it's like I'm like, holy shit, we need to go back to church because if Bitcoin hits $1 million in 90 days, like I said, we're on the cusp of Mad Max. But
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. I don't think I'd want to be in a place, in a world where Bitcoin hits 1 million this quickly, because that would, Bitcoin hitting 1 million would make it more valuable than a lot of, basically, it's like, what's the market cap of it
we
right
did the
now?
math. It's something like a 20-25 trillion dollar market cap, so double gold.
Yeah, yeah, it would be very crazy, to hit that. That basically, like at that point, like any other currency, or any other investment, like people just start taking money out. So like you'd
Mm.
see like a lot of crashes. You'd see like the fabric of society would change as it is now. And I don't think anyone, apart from people who are truly doomsday prepped, really want that. So I would be very happy if it hits 100K, but I'm not holding any breath for any of those things. I don't particularly think I'm very good at timing any of the markets. I just like DCA, like average, like my cost over time.
No, that's
Yeah.
smart, man. Like, cause long story short, especially when we had the bull market, I had some buddies, whether it was back home in the Northeast or back in Florida, they would hit me about Doge and Sheeb and all this stuff, and they would send me these just idiot YouTube channels, and some guy would be like, I have a PhD in neuroscience bullshit. And I would tell them, I'm like, good job. I have a couple buddies who work in tech, have PhDs or doctors like Rob, who's actually worked, can read crypto code, worked on Cardano. And I'm like, these guys can actually interpret this shit and they DCA. So it's funny. It's like, I noticed like the smarter, more educated somebody is, someone like you could probably make, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like you in a weekend with some beers, you could probably make some basic trading engine that could kind of give you, let's call it a 10% hit rate. But it's like all the mental energy and time you have to do that. Or to your point, you can just pick an amount you're comfortable with for your income and you just DCA. And statistically, over 5-10 years, you're going to make money from now and you don't even have to stress it, you know?
Yeah. I would not give myself that much credit. Like making anything that outperforms any market by 10% is, you could like, that's basically what all these hedge funds want to do. And yeah, it's a very hard game to be in. Seems easy, but I think it's hard because you have to like keep on it and many different factors. Um, Coming back to our initial point when what we were talking about, what do you think happens to like the money cycle right now? Because with the new loans that the Fed is doing, they've already added like 400 billion in cash, or like to their balance sheet at least, in the last week and a half. So that's basically half the tightening that they did in the past year.
Raised, yeah.
Do you think it continues this way? Because I think it's going to continue this way. Like, like these banks are like this bad in their position. Like, there's no, it's going to continue this way. So, like, what happens?
Yeah, I think a while ago you said, the Fed's stuck between a rock and a hard place and that edge. And then just to get out of bed, you literally need to shoot up and you have to take more and more, like the Kurt Cobains of the world. And what happens with any hard drug like that, unfortunately, you either basically overdose or you get sober. And that's what Peter Schiff talks about with just this fun money monopoly we've had the last 15, 20 years. And like you said, the Fed either tightens to hell, people lose jobs, people get evicted from their houses. Like it's just not good for the economy, or we go just into money printer on Burr. And even if we don't hit hyper, if we hit hyperinflation, I mean, it's Mad Max. It's like laws, everything go out. But even if America, let's call it with what the Fed's predicting, hit 15% year over year inflation. I mean, they say when America gets a cold, the rest of the world gets pneumonia. Parts of Europe are already having 20-25% inflation. So if ours hit 15, some of them could almost have, almost double, triple digit year over year inflation. And that's my point. It's like I think the Fed is is flying this plane while they're building it. And that's the thing. It's like, I think 2 years ago, everyone's like, oh, there's no way they can get us up to, 6-7%. We're basically there now. And to your point,
Mm-hmm.
in just less than 30 calendar days, they've undone almost a year's worth of work. And that's the thing. It's just like it's kind of like someone that's bipolar. One day they're hot, one day they're cold. And there's that running joke of like, don't fight the Fed. I don't even think the Fed knows what they're doing. And I know like Jerome Powell is kind of like this weird God cult meme. Money printer on Burr, and we always joke about him in the chat. But it's like, honestly, feel like if you sat down with him at a coffee shop, I feel like he's an honest, good dude. And it's like, can you imagine if you and I were in Jerome Powell's shoes right now? Like, what would you do? I just think the markets are just like little kids right now, and I think the Fed, like we said, is stuck between a rock and a hard place. And you know, it seemed like they were pretty consistent on doing the right thing with the tightening, but they've slowed down some. And even people like Cash Kari and stuff like that. He's, I think, the president of the Minnesota Fed. He's very much uh worrying about the average American, putting food on the table, but he was also for the tightening. But I've seen recent interviews with him where he's like, okay, it's time to slow down. We've basically done like the fastest rate hike since like the 70s, 80s, to maybe take a 3 month leave, see where stuff is at. But to your point, I think if they just slowed down, maybe just kept it at 25 basis points, or just, zero for a month or two. But to your point, they undid like a month worth of hard work with, the 400 billion. So I just, back to my point, I think they're bipolar. Whatever the markets cry for, they do it, So it's hard, and God knows what they're doing 30 days from now, let alone the next
Yeah.
6 months.
Well, the issue is that the Fed's tools, I think, are very blunt, um, in the sense that they only have really two things that they can truly do. They can either change the money supply, which they can do using like the balance sheet, like they can loan money to banks, things like that, or they could basically like reduce or increase like the interest rates, which is a very blunt tool because it impacts many sectors of society rather than like specific sectors that might need like impacting. It's not really their fault. It's just the way it's set up right now. Um, I do think that, man, I don't particularly know where we're gonna be anytime like the next 6 months because, as you said, you made a great point about the markets and how they are so attuned to change at the very slightest comments made by the Fed, and how they're like so volatile these days. Like you get like 3% down and up basically as like any single comment, right? So yeah, I do think that the markets in general are being very fickle right now. They're like acting as if it's like a bull market. But yeah, that's just like how the markets work and how grade works in general. But in terms of like the Fed itself, I do think that like they don't have much choice now.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they have to do is continue to increase rates till we see inflation go down. On the other hand, the Atlanta Fed today released like a statement that they think that in the next quarter, the GDP is going to grow, or like I think by the end of the year, it's going to grow by 3%. So it's like, how are we truly in a recession with like the GDP is growing? Like and also like, is that growth only because people are paying more for like the same items due to
Mm-hmm.
inflation, or is it just because like people are doing well, unemployment is low, but they're also not doing well because they didn't have money. Like they have jobs, and that's like the metric they mostly use for is the economy doing well, uh, in terms like of people doing well. But on the other hand, like they don't have enough money, like savings rates are the lowest. So I was very shocked when I saw like 3% increase in like the GDP when like the general person is not doing well. I don't know. What do you think is the like where do you think we are at by, let's do longer term. Do you think anything changes out of this long term for the economy, or do you think it's just like a cycle? We go back up and down, the same thing again.
Yeah, what's the old saying? Markets don't repeat, but they definitely rhyme, or whatever. And I know we've hit this thread a couple times during this talk, but end of the day, man, like I tell people one thing that is, I've said this a couple of times, and I'll die on this hill. No offense to any of the MIT or Harvard or Stanfords of the world. If you want to learn about human psychology, I don't care what Stanford, masters you get in psychology, human science, whatever. You want to learn about human psychology, just human fear, how people's just like dogmatic reptilian brain work. take 5 to 10K of your own money, put it in, but you giggle because you get it. Put 5 to 10K of your own money into any market you choose, let it sit there for a year. Man, I tell people the first year I got into crypto, long story short, what would now be about, just see on the spot, I could do math in my head. Let's just call it anywhere between 5 to 8 grand of Bitcoin. What would be now in Bitcoin price? I about lost in 2017. I bought all the ICOs. I bought some Golem. I bought some EOS. And long story short, within about a 5 month window, that doubled or tripled. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm a genius. This is awesome. Like if I was doing mental math, I'm like, if I keep this up for 12 more months, I'm going to like be able to put a down payment on a house in Miami, blah, blah, blah. Well, started end of
Yeah.
2017, started 2018. And that's my point. It's like, people, especially now, joke about the fourth turning. 100 years ago, basically, we had the Great Depression. A lot of the current financial national regulations and entities that now exist were put into place because of that. So it's, I unfortunately, I think it wouldn't surprise me in 10 years. Like I joke with at the meetup about this. In '08, we printed $800 billion. And people are like, oh my God, this is ludicrous. We just bailed out Wall Street, like, too big to fail, all this bullshit. 10 years later, it's basically $8 trillion we printed. Like, so it's a 10x. And this is my point. It's like, what's it going to be in 10 more years? 80 trillion, 70 trillion? It's basically been in our lifetimes that the US like ran up this deficit. I remember when I was in middle school, or it might have been my freshman year of high school, I think we hit $10 trillion for the first time. And people are like, oh my God, this is crazy. Well, in 10 years, it basically did a 3x. That's the point. It's like, in 10 years, if all of us are still talking, we have like wife, kids, it's like, what's it going to be? 90, $100 trillion? Like, can the debt even get that big before other countries? But that reason I go down like that rabbit hole of a rant is I just think all this end of the day is like psychology and market. And, unfortunately, humans have always killed. We've always been greedy. Wars are probably never going to be a thing of the past. I'm more agnostic now, but I think there's a lot people can get out of certain religions, whatever one they pick. That's, not my place to say. But at the same time, some of the worst atrocities in, human history because from religion, even though a lot of whether it's Islam or Christianity, there's a lot of, tenets of love and being a, pillar of your community. At the same time, some of the biggest genocides and war in human history have, occurred under both. And the reason I talk about all that is, people are like, oh, we're going to put all this regulation in place. We're going to have the Dodd-Frank Act. We're going to blah, blah, blah. And you and me, like in our lifetime, bro, this is like the third financial crisis. So it's like they're happening more regularly. They're happening with more intensity. And that just goes to my point. I was telling Atif at the group, and this is why I'm still in that 10K like Bitcoin bandwagon. I think there's going to be some black swan event. Like people say the other rest of the world will stop taking the US dollar. So I guess by definition, it's not a black swan. But my point is, I think by end of the decade, something is going to happen where what I mean, like 1 in 2 people in America, if you met them that day, they're going to be talking about it, how people were talking about 9/11. So that's my point. I think, unfortunately, by the time we're 80, it wouldn't surprise me if this happened 3 or 4 more times. My long-winded point, and I'm still on this bandwagon, is I think by end of the decade, just something is going to happen where people are going to be like, okay, this whole thing is a Ponzi scheme, whether it's gold, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's something else. I think people are going to realize this legacy financial system is rotted from the core. And it wouldn't surprise me, like I said, if when we're 60 or 70, we look back and be like, this was the start of, whatever we're going to call this 2.0 financial system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully agree with you on some of those points. I do think that we have to take a look at it from a more macroscopic lens in the sense that, uh, yes, that there's been more downturns in the last like 25 years has been great, for example, but it's also been more upturns, like overall, than there were in like the last 100 years. Like the economy, like the actual S&P 500 graph has been more steeper. And also when you think of like black swan events, we got to realize that like 100 years ago, the black swan events were not only financial, they were wars. Like
Mm-hmm.
we had World War I and World War II. So like coming out of those, like your economy is already always hammered all the time. Because war really drains the economy in general, especially if it's like a world war. Like the whole global economy is hammered in general.
Mm-hmm.
So like the ups and downs have lasted for a long time, and I think we're pretty we're pretty blessed that right now the ups and downs are more just like financial markets crumbling or like nation states crumbling. Um, but going back to the S&P 500, if you look at like the graph in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, uh, they did have like a very substantial crash, but that's also because the S&P 500 like was gradually increasing. It was not like a steep increase. If you look at the S&P 500 in the last 5 years, the increase is very steep, right? And it's also because the rate of innovation and change has
Quicker.
increased so drastically in the last 20 years, than it did like from 1940 to like 1980. Think about it. In 1995, like or so, like it started getting like the first, like the internet was in the 1980s, uh, dark web and stuff. In the 1990s, you started getting like the initial curated websites, like late 1990s, and like you had the .com bubble after like the big boom in the S&P 500 and Nasdaq and stuff. Uh, and then since then, even though we had that game, the genie was out of the bag, right?
Hmm.
Everything now is technology, is websites and online and the internet. Then you have the smartphones. The smartphones is another revolutionary technology that like has improved productivity and also rabbit holes and like toxic behavior by probably like 100-fold, right? So everyone has a platform because of smartphones. Then came the age of like really large scale computing. So large scale data being generated because of all these IoT devices, because we're already always on the internet. That's where social networks came from. Like this large scale data, that's where like a lot of AI is coming from because you have all this data. Like you think of like money printing, like how everything is in 90% of the world's data is created like the last 36 months. Not even 36, actually the last 18 months. Because we create data at speeds that we've never seen before, right? Petabytes, exabytes of data. And
Can
because of
you
that, like
sorry, I was gonna say, like for me and other people at home, can you unpack that? When you mean by data, like I guess, like for example, I have a $10 bill and I give it to you and you give it back to me. We had $20 of value exchanged for the most part. Is that what you mean? Just going like, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Is that like data stored or just like input output? That's
it's both. So the
okay.
amount of data transmitting and on the internet, as well as data being stored. So, like data storage is at an all-time high right now. Like there's full, like, this like might be a bit like, most people probably wouldn't care about this, but for example, at Facebook, right? They were one of the first people who had to, or YouTube, they were the first people had to like really deal with like a shit ton of people using stuff at the same time. So when I was, interning in 2016 at Facebook. I didn't intern at Facebook, but like I had friends interning at Facebook. Their data pipeline was like at that point 5 petabytes plus per second, which is ridiculous to even like think about it. So and that doesn't always mean like user traffic, but that's like how high they were testing it up to. And I'm not even sure what like the amount of data being transmitted now with YouTube and stuff like that. But like because of all of this like rapid change, we're also seeing these rapid increases in the stock market because innovation inherently brings change in society and change in like our eating, drinking, living habits, and hence our buying habits as well. So yes, we've seen crashes, but overall, if you look at like the chart last 20 years, we've actually seen a very healthy increase if you actually DCA for the traditional markets. Um, Crypto is a completely different deal, right? Because crypto challenges the whole premise of how markets and also currency and also how exchange of monetary value, and what monetary value is should function. So that one I have no predictions for is like where we're going to be in 10 years. Some people in the group say like, hey, we're going to have like Bitcoinization like the next 10 to 15 years. Like everything, like you and I are going to just like do everything and transmit every money through Bitcoin. I don't think so. Personally, I think it's going to be like the easiest way for people to adopt Bitcoin is for them to like not really care about Bitcoin in the sense that it's like behind the, like it's part of all of the apps. Like Fidelity now allows you to do stuff with Bitcoin,
Yep.
like trade with, like send people Bitcoin. Um, And so if it's just like behind these walls and like you can use whatever you want to pay, I think that's the best case scenario for a lot of these currencies because you don't want your currency to be front and center everything all the time. But I'd love to get your take on that. Like, what do you think the future of crypto is in 10 years?
Yeah, like I kind of joke on the functional hyper Bitcoin maxi in the group because, like I said, in 2018, I bought some Bitcoin, but then like you said, human psychology. I saw EOS and Cardano and Golem. I'm like, oh my god, this is like 5 cents. If this goes to $1, not knowing like what the fuck a market cap is in basic math in my head. But lost my ass on that, and I kind of got like the Udis of the world, like, oh, this is why, again, you can maybe have 10-20% your stack in like the Litecoins, the Solanas of the world, but you should keep 80% in Bitcoin for not if when the market corrects, like we've all seen. So, but what you just said, the reason I bring up the hyper Bitcoin maxi thing is, I think crypto as itself cannot succeed until Bitcoin succeeds. I think obviously could that change in the future? Anything's possible, but at least the next 5-6 year runway, Bitcoin's the alpha. It's not going anywhere. And to your point, this is what I tell people. When's the last time you traded somebody your car or your house title or a bar of gold for a burger or a haircut? You don't do that. Why? Because it's that. Well, you giggle because you get my point. It's like the reason you
Yeah.
give people cash is because yes, cash can have long term value, but it is not a stored long term value like a house. I mean, cars are a bad example, but like a Maserati gold. And I would put Bitcoin in that category. To your point, I could see in 30 years where maybe I put 10% down. 30 years in 10-20 years I put 10% down on a house, but I do it in Bitcoin, and maybe there's some decks or whatever where it's like there's literally on the blockchain, there's a contract, blah blah blah. But same thing in 10-20 years, like I don't count hyper Bitcoinization. We go to Pine House for another meetup, and I give them 100 satoshis for a goddamn beer. It's like, but because you don't do that in gold, you don't do that with your house or car title, but you do that with cash. Why? Because cash long term is crappy, short term it's good. So yeah, I agree with you. Like, one thing, like I hate buzzwords like Web3, metaverse, hyper Bitcoinization, because you got like 20 different people, you get 20 different definitions for each one, and that's one thing too. I like as all this shit's just been unpacked in the last 24-36 months. Everyone's like, here we go, hyper Bitcoinization, and even recently in the chat, like some people are like, oh man, this uptick in Bitcoin, all these people, they're seeing the Fed's pivot and they're going back, and it's a small sample size, but like I have a decent, what's the word I'm looking for? Outside of the crypto thing, between work, personal, some gym buddies, I'm in a couple of different verticals. This past weekend, I was in San Antonio for a powerlifting meet, and long story short, my gym owner was kind of talking shit to theirs. He's like, "Oh, we got this crazy Bitcoin guy. He's gonna kick all y'all's asses." And when I got there, we were chatting for like 5 minutes. They're like, "Why are you into Bitcoin?" I gave them my synopsis. After 5 minutes, we're talking about squat form. We're talking about mono racks, how to use band, deload. Like these guys didn't give a shit or whatever, and like they're meatheads, and that's my point. It's like I was talking to my aunt the other day. She's doing well. Like I had a buddy of a buddy. He just had surgery. Was texting him. Like, the average person doesn't care, and that's why when people were like, "Oh, this current uptick is people fleeing," I'm like, I think it's whales right now. To your point, change is slow and stuff. It's slow and steady, and all of a sudden, and that's why I still think when people say hyper Bitcoinization, I think we're 10 years out from that. And to your point, I think this idea that like everyone's going to transact everything in Bitcoin is stupid. I think it's like if you're going to put up some property or you're going to start like you said, a VC, maybe 10% of your portfolio, your allocation of that is in Bitcoin because we're actually solid. We're not fluctuating 10% a day. So, yeah, I know that was a little rant there, but like as like the main
Yeah.
Bitcoin maxi in the group, that's like, I just hate that phrase because no one can define it. And I think the people that try to define it, they don't actually look like 10 years out about what even if 10% use 10% of the population was using Bitcoin, like what that would actually look like on a day-to-day, business or a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, also when people do these forecasts out, they often have a linear path in the sense that they think that this is going to be the focus for 10 years, right? But what we've seen like is like the focus can change very quickly. Just a year ago, everyone's focus was like the metaverse. Now no one talks about it
Yeah, for real.
because
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, we could see like a lot more change in the metaverse if that was everything that people were working on. Like there's like a big focus on that. Similarly, like if no one talks about Bitcoin and no one cares about it for like the next 5 years, you're basically at this particular level only. Like innovation often needs like a lot of, and adoption often needs like a lot of hype, sadly, behind it. Often. I do think that, yeah, I think the industry in general has a really bad rep right now. And it's part of the reason is because of the people, in the sense that a lot of people have been burned by like a lot of frauds. They've been burned by a lot of like their money being stolen. They see all these like super toxic just groups and groups and groups on everything. WhatsApp, Telegram, Twitter, join this, invest in this. Like, dude, like it's very hard to take the industry as not being a scam if you're a random person. And I completely understand that. In fact, a lot of the people are also kooky, like the top of the people in the funnel.
Yeah.
Like even Peter Schiff to a lot of people would be extremely kooky, right? Because he's like, a lot of these people have very strong opinions and they're like either very maximalist or very bullish or very bearish. There's no like real in the middle people
No.
in the field.
Now, the one thing I will say, because like sorry to cut you off, but like how Atif is a Balaji fan, like one person, and I even try to do my homework and I follow her newsletter. If Lynn Alden says something, I will like 90-ish% listen to her blindly because she's like one of the most level-headed people that can explain very complicated macro shit in plain English. But she like to your point, like out of what the maybe 1,000 people I follow on Twitter, she's like the one person I can name to your point, like one person out of 1,000, that's actually, like you said, like real and not crazy.
Yeah, which is not a
No, it's not
great
good. It's
thing if
horrible.
you want to like really have to like get people in the field or even talk about like some of these things. Like now, so most of my friends are not into blockchain or Bitcoin. As I said at the start of the podcast, I'm not particularly like a big trader. Like I do DCA and a few things, and that's mostly it. I don't do speculative trades as much. And I'm more interested in like the blockchain and the potential uses and some of those things. But if nowadays, if I like even if I mention the word, like you get looks from people because it's so associated now with like the crazies of the world.
Yeah.
That is a bad rep, and this is something that I mentioned a lot during the bull cycle because at that time it was not like that way. And I said there's so many toxic people in this field that this is going to get shunned sooner rather than later. Like the field is as soon as like the gains start dwindling, it's gonna be like that. And so right now, even though you say like, hey, we're not dropping 10%, well, we have seen that Bitcoin is not as stable still. Like it goes up a lot in value and it goes down a lot in value. And we're not even talking about like altcoins, which are just a whole different ballgame, right? So I think till we get to a point where um, we have like more stability. I mean, USDC was one of the key initiatives for that. Like stablecoins are one of the key initiatives for that. But I think trust in stablecoins is at an all-time low right now.
Hmm.
USDC DPEG, like Luna had its like all of these basically a lot of stablecoins have had a lot of issues. So
Question for you.
I think
Did you ever trust is a loose word. Like, uh, did you ever have like let's call it over a 70% conviction that these stable coins are probably backed 1 to 1? Because like even in the peak, because I've never, besides I wouldn't even say owning stable coins, but whether I got a Swan account, but if I sold on Coinbase, obviously you have the USDC there. But I would immediately, if I sold anything, kick it over to my bank account, just take the 3 day hit and just no transaction fee or whatever. But I've never purposely bought or interacted in stable coins. Did you ever, whether it was a couple years ago or the bull market, did you ever even have like a 70% conviction that these things are backed 1 to 1? Because it's just like the banks too big to fail. And like when people like were holding $10,000 in Tether, I'm like, are you really trusting that's backed 1 to 1? They're like, well, of course it is. It's stable. I'm like, Lehman Brothers was stable at one point. I never thought they were backed or good. What was your kind of take on that if you had one?
it's a lot worse than that because if the dollar goes up and down in value, right? For example, the euro fell last year, and yeah, it went down, but it didn't crash because like it's fluctuations in dollar to euro, dollar to other places. other currencies are natural, right? And they have an inflation and deflation of that country. It's like with stablecoin, if it depegs, the confidence is completely shattered. And
Hmm.
so it's like all or nothing. As soon as it depegs, like it starts like like a spiral. So I think stablecoin is a good way to like on ramp and off ramp.
Hmm.
But I never had conviction. I've never bought a single stablecoin because I've never like thought it was a great idea in
Yeah.
terms of like actual storing monetary value in it. I do think it's a good way to on ramp and off ramp from like crypto. But man, I thought it was a bit risky because like of the like if it depegs, it could be a free fall. Like overnight, you could lose everything. And that's just not that's not a bet I want to take anytime soon. If I want to do that, I could just trade options.
Yeah. Not for real.
Yeah, I don't know. I think like the industry has lost a lot of credibility in the last year. And so we have to make up a lot of that credibility to be able to even be back to a place where people like where society truly respects and wants to interact with like a lot of like uh, blockchain and crypto and like Web3 stuff. And that's just my take. It's more of a bearish take, but I do think like that trust goes a long way.
No, definitely. I was gonna say a good segue on that, I guess, on like everything we've talked about, whether it's from real estate just to macro stuff, banking, crypto. A lot of people think that the 2020s was just going to be every decade, like you said, it seems like things speed up, but the 2020s were definitely going to be kind of like how like in the roaring 20s in the 1900s, it was going to be a time to look back and it's like all this innovation, blah blah blah. And one reason I wanted to get you on, you're definitely like I said, a lot of people now, they throw out crypto adoption, they throw out Web3, AI and stuff, and you're someone in the group that works on this shit, can explain it in plain English. And I guess like we just talked about all these issues right now, and a lot of people think AI can fix a lot of things. A lot of people think it can be concerning with the Andrew Yang camp with automation. Obviously, at the end of the day of a company, their job is to increase profits. If that requires you get more AI, you get more machinery, it lays off people end of the day. They want to get their stocks up, their shareholders, fiduciary well, not fiduciary, but they have a just responsibility to make as much profit. I think I've told you this as just the average idiot. I could see a ton of benefits with AI. With that said, like we said, there's a ton of benefits to social media. It's very obvious to you, me, everyone listening at home. The average person cannot handle social media. It's just as addictive as sugar or hardcore drugs for most people. Most people cannot quit social media for a day if you put a gun to their head. And the thing with AI is obviously like there's servers, people, you have to do uptime on that, keep it running. But the idea is it kind of runs itself and it learns how like a toddler would learn. It gets better. So I could see how in 5 or 10 years, I joke about this. When Facebook came out, I think if you told people in 10 years, hey, there's going to be legit evidence that this is interfering and overthrowing political elections around the world as you're poking your grandma and sending cat memes, I think people would laugh at you. So I could see a ton of benefit to AI in 5 to 10 years. But obviously, like you said, there's once certain genes, once they're out of the bottle, inflation, social network, psychology, whatever it is, good luck getting that back in. So someone that works in the space, I guess uh like how do I word this? I guess first, where's the space at right now, realistically? Because people say AI and they just say all this shit, but then talking to you and Isaacs of the group, I kind of get a touch of where it's at now. And then over this decade, what's stuff that makes you very optimistic about AI? And then what's some stuff you see that it could be fixed like optimistically? And then what's some stuff that concerns you and you've got to be like, all right, we kind of need to keep a governor on this so it doesn't get out of hand.
Man, that's a very loaded question and lots of different parts. Like
Well,
maybe I
you're
can
the
answer it
man of the hour for it.
in three parts. I can give a brief history of the past of AI, like how we got here, right?
Hmm.
I could give a brief talk of the present of AI, and then we could dive into the future of AI, which could be maybe regulatory. Well, we could talk about the regulations, but we could also talk about like the innovation and what potential it has to disrupt. So AI has been around for a very long time in the sense that in the 70s and 80s, neural networks, which are like the heart of what we do today, were developed in the 80s by Jeffrey Hinton at University of Toronto. And they've been around for a while. In fact, I go to the Austin Deep Learning Meetup every other week. And one of the people that I talked to, he's older, and he was actually he's been working in the field since like the 90s. At the time, there's another very famous AI scientist, I think the head of Facebook AI research, Jan LeCun, who basically popularized AI. At the time. He used it for like the U.S. Postal Service to like rate the numbers. So like handwritten numbers, you could be able to like decipher it. So it's used in postal mail so that no one has to like manually read all the mail all the time for sorting and stuff. So it's rather than there was like a big AI winter till basically 2011 when AlexNet was released, which basically uh, there's this very famous data set called ImageNet. And what ImageNet basically does is it has like 1,000 classes, like objects, cow, animal, human, and it has like 1,000,000 images. The initial version has 1,000,000 images. And you basically have to do prediction of which class that image belongs to. So if it's an image of a cow, you have to say this is cow in the top one. And basically that competition was used to test like computer vision, like how good computer vision was. Is when AlexNet was released, it basically blew out every single benchmark in the past, and we were off the races. The genie was out of the bag for neural networks, and then we went from there to like recurrent neural networks, convolutional neural networks, lots of different things. So 2018, when Google released this paper on transformers. So transformers are basically attention-based networks, where attention is a module. So rather than having, there's different types of modules, like convolutional modules, recurrent modules, linear modules. Attention is basically just a module, which contains several parts to it. Usually has an attention head. I wouldn't bore you with the details. And it has linear. So basically, what this was able to do was able to understand larger chunks of text and eventually images too. With large chunks of text and be able to understand it better than any network we'd seen before, right? And at the time, this is something that we called a representation learning network. So an encoder only network, which basically means that you give it an input and you get a bunch of numbers out. So you're able to represent that input in an embedding or basically a chunk of numbers, which is different than the revolution we're seeing right now, which is a generative network, which basically means you give it a number and you're able to predict next tokens or additional information. So those are called auto-regressive networks. In the sense you use previous information to predict the next information. So those are the two types of transformers, encoder and decoder transformers. And transformers initially were very useful for translation tasks and general understanding tasks. Now, if someone in 2018, I was like a grad student in 2018 when this was coming out, it was like the paper just came out. I was in an MLP class at the time, and the professor said, "Hey, we're going to stop everything we're doing, and we're going to talk about this new paper that just came out this week." And little did I know it would like change the entire field at the time, right? From 2018 to 2023, if someone had told me that this is the pace of innovation we'll see, I would not believe it. So that is one of the things that makes me a bit apprehensive. I don't think anyone in industry expected us to be this good so fast. So I don't think if anyone tells you they know exactly where AI is going to be in 5 years, I think they're lying because I don't particularly know where we're going to be in like 2 years. In 1 year, in fact, every week there's like some new innovation. Coming back to today, that was like a brief history, right? So that was transformers for text. Then they came up with vision transformers for images, understanding images. And then GPT came out in, I think, 2020, something or so, 2018, 2020, somewhere around there. And I've been using GPT for a while. I actually have a paper where I built in GPT-2 to do like layout understanding and layout prediction, like where to add like the next text and stuff. Like a couple of years ago. GPT-3 came out and it was pretty crazy, pretty good. And the other one that was really crazy was DALI in DALL-E 2. So DALL-E, you can go from text to an image, and they use something known as VQVAEs, which are, doesn't matter, various autoencoders, and uh, the first one uses that. The next one uses diffusion networks, which also doesn't matter. But basically, we're at a space right now where we don't particularly know where the space is going to evolve to. Right now, the trend so far, as I've mentioned, was text only, vision only. Now we're going into the multimodal space where you can take a text and an image together and encode them in the same joint embedding space or in a generative space. So you can go from a text, output a video. You can take an image and generate a text. You can take an image, generate another image. It's like you have all these modalities that eventually you can do a lot of those things with that. Now imagine if you're able to combine text, video, audio, and any other signal in this, like all these modalities in the same network. Uh, you're able to do like true actual robotics, like general purpose robotics. And you're also able to do like general purpose, like generations. You can generate videos. You can do like full artworks. You could do like a lot of like, you can maybe like, you can do like your whole own podcast, like an AI podcast. Like the AIs talk about a new topic every week amongst themselves. The issue that I feel,
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, some of the
yeah,
thumbnails
go
and
ahead.
some of the shorts we've been putting out. Yeah, we've been turning that around with Chat GPT, and because I wrote it down here, the Mid Journey. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
Yep.
yeah, literally, like Tiff and I will talk. We'll kind of have some ideas, like whether I get the script or he does. But basically, yeah, he'll throw that in the Chat GPT, be like, hey, make me a script on a biology prediction, and then he'll plug that into the Mid Journey, and it gets him that thumbnail, and like from start to finish, it'd be 30 minutes. And like I said, I do concert work, but I have some buddies, whether they're out in Atlanta or they're out in on the West Coast, that do like production work. There's a running thing. So let's say you see a Marvel movie that's about 2 hours. Every hour runtime of that film is minimum about an hour to 5 hours of work, whether that's filming, production, getting cast. And I tell people, like, if you have YouTube people you follow that make quality 30-minute videos, that probably takes them a week to make, from like conception to editing, and people that don't work. But same
Yeah.
thing, it's like now as creators, they can save their brain juice, and the shit they were going to do anyway, that 8 hours of just like moving bricks, for lack of a better word, they can automate it like that. And that's why I was asking you, some people are worried about that, but someone that kind of works in a creative field, it's like, I'm going to do all this bullshit anyway. It's not creative. It doesn't feed my juices. If I can kind of offload that and not even just get a production quality that's just as good, but better, it's like, that's where I could see some of the benefit. But like you said too, people can't see where it's going in 5 years, which obviously when you're driving blind, that can kind of be
Yeah.
concerning.
Yeah. So now to the third part, which is like, where do I see this going? Right. So OpenAI released a paper a week ago, uh, where they basically outlined that 90% of jobs have 10% of their tasks could be impacted by AI. And, I think close to 40% of jobs could have 50, like, I think 25% of jobs could have 50% of their tasks impacted by AI. The stuff like, some of those things are pretty like easy to understand, right? So, stuff like uh, photography, like there's AI apps which can do headshots for you automatically. You give it a few photos, they'll do headshots for you. There's stuff like copywriting. There's so many copywriting solutions now. There's stuff such as personal tutor. So why do I need to pay someone like so much money for personal teaching if I can have an AI teach me, right? Like a lot of these things make a lot of sense. Even stuff like basic legal stuff, like a lot of the stuff that paralegals do, some of that could be automated. Like some of a lot of the chatbots and like business outsourcing stuff that people have for customer chat, things like that. Like those are easy use cases. The other thing that is hard to do, hard to predict, is once we start having plugins and stuff, how is it going to impact more complex tasks? So such as like all the way end-to-end accounting, end-to-end software engineering. I think that one's a bit harder because everything that's back end, there's so many things to stitch, but some parts of it could be easily done, right? Like now there's no good sites for building your own website very quickly. And I'm not talking about Wix or any of these things, which are like drag and drop and easily customize. You can just add in text and it'll build website pieces for you. So yeah, or it build like website, or it build APIs for you, write code for you. So, I think there's so many jobs. Like data entry is basically dead at this point. Basic business management, even like stock trading. I feel like
Yeah.
eventually, like humans have day and night that they have to do. We're already seeing that high frequency trading is already replacing like it's like the most profitable hedge funds are high frequency trading funds these days. Citadel, James Trade, and this is a trend in the last like 10, 15 years. They don't really have business people as such. It's mostly like a lot of quants and
Oh
tech
yeah.
people, right? So, you add AI to it, you further improve the thing.
Hmm.
So stock trading, we can just have AI traders trade for us, like in the market. So a lot of these things, I feel like the ways it can impact us are very many and often too many to truly understand. The one economy that I do think is going to really benefit from this is the creator economy. So they expect that to become like $500 billion business in the next like 3 years. Like the number of creators. But dude, I don't know if like all the big revolutions we've had, they've been enabling revolutions. The only big one was like the industrial revolution, which like removed a bunch of factory jobs. Uh, Actually not the industrial revolution. The I guess the last 100 years of like real robotic manufacturing innovation, where like
Hmm.
you removed humans and you replaced them with full machines. Even then, like those jobs basically went away, right? Right now they're in China, but a lot of them, like they're lesser in number because there's a lot more automation involved and people move to other jobs. But that was a couple of industries only. When all of the industries are impacted very quickly at the same rate or at different rates, but very quickly at the same time, uh, would we have enough avenues to create new jobs? Is something that, and when I say jobs, these are like stabler jobs, not gig economy jobs, not creator economy jobs, like stable jobs. I don't know. I'm not sure. So those are like some of the constraints that I have at this point. I don't think anyone truly knows where AI is going to be in like 5 to 10 years. Um, but if they do, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I know. We talked at the group meetups, and then it might have been a month ago now. We had Atif had that dinner at his place, and we were just kind of going down rabbit holes on stuff. And I remember you were telling me, I forget the numbers, but let's just say like 5 years ago, you would put in one input and it would give you 10, and now the equivalent is like you put in one input and it gives you like a billion. And then you were explaining it. I'm an idiot, so the rest of it went over my head. But you were just telling me like if you keep that, like you said, it doesn't even improve, but you just keep that trajectory line basically, like you said, within 5 years, you give it one input, you get a trillion. And it's just like, and you were like, if you told me when I first got to UT, you would have laughed that out of the room. But like you said, within 10 years, that looks like it's on the money. And yeah, I wanted to ask you that, man, because like I said, if you go on the interwebs and you look at AI, you have the Andrew Yang camp, which I think to some degree, like you said, it's going to automate a ton of stuff and let go of jobs. And you have like some people that go, you know, social media has disenfranchised a lot of people. Drug abuse and suicide, other mental illnesses arise in America. Not saying that's just attributed to automation, social media, but there's a lot of correlation that is part of it. And then if you ramp that up, and let's just say by the end of the decade, 1 in 4 Americans are air quote unemployable, is that is the AI going to be so fruitful and so abundant and make everything so efficient that actually people like the coal miner down the street is actually your next Shakespeare and you just don't know it? Or is he just going to sit on the couch and smoke weed all day and, go through 2 or 3 divorces? And then, same thing. I know you know this too. Like some people say, technology, it disenfranchises people. Well, 30 years ago, Lewis Rossman wouldn't have had a job. Why? Because MacBooks weren't a thing. So it's like, yeah, maybe MacBooks, take away some jobs or automate some shit. But at the same time too, it creates, one point in time, the car wasn't a thing. And then people are like, oh my God, the car is going to get rid of all these buggy jobs. It's like, well, now you need people to make the cars. Now you need people to maintain them. So like I said, I kind of wanted to get you on because when I go on the interwebs and talk to some people, everyone's like doomsday. Some people are like, oh, this is the best thing ever since Jesus Christ. And someone that works in the field, I think you're pretty level headed and you just explained a lot of complex shit in simple English. And it's, I guess like the kind of like last thing I wanted to end on, unless you had anything else. I was talking with Atif about this, that obviously a lot of people in the crypto space are in it to make money, when Moon, when Lambo. But there's a lot of people, I would say part of my libertarian spectrum comes out, but you have the Alex Gladsteins, the humanitarians that they don't care. Like I've always told people, there's going to be people that always have way more wealth than me. But you see in the last 20 years, the problem is everyone's playing this board game. All of a sudden, the feds and the New York fat cats, they get bailed out, they flip the game board, and they're like, oh, we're still playing Monopoly. It's like, well, no, you just pulled 1,000 extra bucks out of your ass. Like, this is bullshit. And the idea is that crypto, the Ethereum's, DeFi, whatever we're going to call this shit, going to level the playing field. I was talking with Atif about this. Do you think in the next 10 years, let's just say, for lack of a better word, Bitcoin and AI would work in tandem at creating just a more equal society? Do you think AI could become so efficient that even if the Bitcoin network is still running, it's not needed? Or do you think they're both in different runways? Or it's just kind of like you said, there's just so much shit moving right now. It's just like, let alone a month from now, it's just too hard to tell what's going to happen in 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's too hard to predict what's going to happen. In the sense, I think they have different trajectories as well. I think AI is a lot more mature network in the sense that it has a crazy amount of backing. It has been around. So this is not the first AI hype cycle, right? In 2013 to 15, even 17, every single company was saying like AI in every single commercial they could fit into. This is like the second coming of the crazy hype cycle. But it's a lot more mature as a field, and it's a lot less equitable as a field as well. In the sense, what do you really need to train AI? You need large amounts of data, and you need a huge amount of training capacity, right? So in that sense, it's inequitable for the people providing the APIs. Once you have the API, yeah, you can have your own custom models, and that will make it more equitable. But you're always going to be at the mercy of these like really big companies who have all the training data on the resources to actually train these things and to hire the researchers and do all of those things, right? It's not, it's completely different in terms of the equitability that Bitcoin is. I don't actually know what the ramp up of Bitcoin is going to be. We could either be in a place in like 5 years where like it still stays as like a niche store value for some of the market, or we could see a financial crisis like in the next year, and a lot more people on there to Bitcoin. So I would be like the worst person to really truly predict the future. I will say this though, that there will be a lot of change in the next 6 to 12 months, in the sense that we will truly see how stable the economy is, and that in turn will change a lot of like focus on innovation versus non-innovation, in the sense that when the economy is not doing well and when your profits are low or dwindling or your revenue is dwindling, a lot of focus moves away from uh, general innovation to more like running the business and doing innovations in very specific areas and only take the big bets. So we will see how that plays out with like the rest of the economy. In terms of Bitcoin and crypto, I think it's going to be very interesting in the next 6 months. We might see a big resurgence in crypto startups, and a big focus in those, or we can say that this fact we're like, yeah, this massive hype cycle in the last year and a half in crypto, and now just like dead. I wonder how many, do we have stats on like how many Web3 projects are still working? The stuff that they took VC money for? Because I think like everyone and their mom could get money to build a Web3 app like a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, no,
That's kind of crazy.
that's a good question, man. I mean, that's like, I mean, even during the bull market, man, like, people would be like, same thing. I know, like, you were interested in Solana, and we would talk about it. But, people would talk about like Avalanche or just all these new like dexes that were popping up, or just whatever like NFT bullshit like swap thing. And they would talk all this stuff, and I said, well, no offense, like they've been up for 6 months, and people would go, what's your point? I said, you could literally throw shit at a wall right now and make a profit on something just because there was so much money entering the zone. And like we've said, crypto is a casino on a casino. And it's like, to your point, you kind of find out the men from the boys when the liquidity dries up. Because what's the old saying? Real companies are efficient, or real companies are efficient not effective in a bear market. You know, that they're really good at the right things, not necessarily everything. Like, you know, they master at the handful of things that get them through the bear market. They're not a jack of all trade. But I mean, yeah, to your point, it's like I was just thinking about it the other day. It's like I remember every week it seems like something was going to be the next Ethereum killer, the next Bitcoin killer. And then to your point, it's like I can't even remember the last time I saw an article crypto that was legit on, oh, this is the next, you know, layer 3 thing on Ethereum that's going to do X, Y, Z. Cause to your point, it's all the liquidity dries up. So it's like you said, it wouldn't surprise me if over 70, 80% of just the crypto startups, if they're completely dried out right now. It wouldn't even surprise me if it was 90% just cause like we said, you throw shit at a wall and it stick the last 24 months.
Yeah. I agree. Also, in terms of when I was talking about AI and innovation, as you say, I I'm pretty hopeful for the future in the sense that I think this could be pretty useful for a lot of things. But I'm hopeful in different ways. I'm hopeful for the amount of like crazy innovation we're going to see because of this and the really cool products and interfaces we're going to see in terms, from this. The thing I'm not fully hopeful about is the human capital stuff, because a lot of innovations you mentioned, like the phone, the laptop, uh, the loom, a lot of these things were enablers in the sense that they enabled you to do things differently or be more efficient or innovative, right? With AI, its potential to be a replacement rather than just an innovation helper. So when you say replacer, is that one of the key things it will help you do is drive costs down, and drive costs down by replacing other jobs that you currently have to use human capital for. So that's the one that I don't fully know. We might see that it doesn't impact it. We might see it might end up creating more jobs, but at this point, I think it's way too early to say that. I do think like certain jobs are going to go away forever, for sure. 100% they're going to go away forever because it just would make sense to pay someone to do that. Or they're going to go like, they're going to dwindle down to a lot fewer in number. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time to be alive and in the market. And as long as there's no crazy geopolitical events that happen, like no wars, uh, and if we don't see a crazy banking crisis in the next like 6 to 12 months,
Knock on
I
wood.
think that eventually, yeah, no, nothing will. Eventually, in the next, I'd say 24 months, we should be back towards like a more healthy environment. 24 to 36 months, but I don't think I'm not very bullish in like the next 12 months for almost anything
No, I'll
except for
agree with
innovation.
that. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of corny too, but you have to, you know, break some eggs to make an omelet. And same thing, obviously, there was the, sorry, just blanked out for a second, but we had the NASDAQ, you know, tech bubble blow up in 2000. And people were like, oh, this is a fad. And you might be able to correct me here, but like since then, the internet value, it's obviously hard to put a sticker price on it, but it's done like a 10, 20x. Same thing, you know, in '08 happened, and the same thing. Everyone's like, oh man, it's going to set us back 10 years. And the Facebook, Ubers, Amazon was already around, but they really started to launch. So it's like, you know, and I've said it before in the podcast, there's some species of trees, man, like they literally need a forest fire to launch their seeds and grow. So it's, you know, like I said, even though these recession times, these pullbacks, whatever you want to call it, they can be really painful for everybody. It kind of separates the men from the
Mhm.
boys. And even like a great artist, some of them, they'll purposely, I think Picasso was big on this. He would like purposely do his art setup in a very half-assed, like painful manner he wasn't used to, because it literally forced him to be more creative because he didn't have his ideal setups or whatever. So to your point, I definitely think the next 12 months are going to be painful, but like we've said, you know, it just separates the men from the boys. You got to break some eggs and make omelets. And I think 5 years, 10 years out from now, it's like, yeah, the COVID and all the money printing was kind of a bitch, but it gave us just all this launch pad to kick off with. And like you said too, it's hard to tell. Like I like to leave stuff on an optimistic note, but there's, like we said, there's so many moving parts. Like we didn't even touch the Russia-Ukraine war and the
Mhm.
China-Taiwan front, but there's just so many moving things right now. That's part of the reason I want to get you on the podcast. I think you're definitely one of the smarter tech guys in the group, but you're level headed. You definitely you know a lot of shit, but like you said, there's stuff you're not gonna act like you're omniscient God. But I thought it'd be cool to get you on the podcast. Like I said, just kind of touch base on macro stuff, AI, and like you said, where things could lead off in the next, you know, 24 to 36 months. But Yeah, I didn't know if you have any final thoughts on anything you wanted to say, man. If you want to do any social media plugs, anything you want to end on, and then we're going on 2 hours, man. So I think we had a good episode. If you have any final closing thoughts.
Yeah, no plugs at all.
Okay.
Just follow the pod. I think it's a great medium to like listen to like some new voices and some new people. I will say that, yeah, similar to you, I think I'm optimistic in the long term. In the short term, I think it's very useful and good to be pragmatic because you don't fully know what happens. But if we truly see Bitcoin 100K 1 mil to the moon, we'll see what happens. But yeah, thanks for having me on the pod, Doug. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, so I appreciate you coming on, brother. Hopefully in the next couple months, maybe we could have you 6 months from now come back on. We touch base and we'll see what of our predictions came right, what came wrong. But yeah, appreciate you coming on, man. Yeah, I'll probably see you around here soon. I'll talk to you later, brother.
Yeah.